Hey guys, welcome to another video here on the AviationPro channel. In this video we're going to take a look at how to start up the Boeing 777 from cold and dark. So in this video I will show you the cold and dark startup procedure for the Boeing 777-300ER, a KLM flight, KLM 641 from Amsterdam to New York, a classic flight that I will also use during the FMC setup procedure in this video. So this video will both consist of the cold and dark procedure and the FMC setup. So without further ado, let's head into the cockpit and start this Boeing 777 up. Now before we start up the Boeing 777 from cold and dark, let me just first show you how to get it in a cold and dark state. As always with PMDG aircraft, this is very simple. Simply go to the flight management system right here. We'll go into PMDG setup. We're gonna load a panel state, and cold and dark should be one of the default panel states. Just select it and hit execute, and right now the aircraft will load the cold and dark state in about 20 seconds. So welcome in the Boeing 777-300ER cockpit. As you can see, it's fully cold and dark and we're gonna have to start it up. So let's go into the captain's seat and see what we can do. Okay guys, so the cold and dark state that I just loaded via the flight management system right here is the one that I'm gonna be working from in this video. So whenever you load that, the aircraft should look exactly the same in the same state. So we're just gonna take it step by step as usual. I'm just gonna go through the systems, try to explain wherever I can, and then we'll start the airplane up. As always, this airplane, like any Boeing and any airliner for that matter, you have to treat it step by step. So we're gonna go through the overhead panel column by column, so from top to bottom like this. And we're gonna explore these systems over here also in a structured manner. That's usually the best way to approach this aircraft. So the first thing that we of course want to do is get some electrical power on the airplane, and for that we turn on the battery switch. Now if you do that on the 777, actually not a lot will happen. The 777 is a very power hungry aircraft, so it will consume a lot of electricity, so to speak. And just turning on the battery usually doesn't really engage systems. The only thing it does is allow for APU to start up and to accept the external power sources. So if you're used to the 737, for example, you will not actually see any other systems running. So don't worry, it's all fine. We're gonna have to use either external power or the APU. In this case, I'm just gonna use the APU for demonstration purposes. So what you're gonna do is just put the APU to start, and it will, it's spring loaded, so it will automatically go back to on. And then in the background, the APU is gonna start up. So I'm gonna move it to start. There we go. And the APU is now running in the background. It's going to start up. Not a lot's going to be happening. You will soon notice that some systems start up. In the meantime, we have to check a few other things. Make sure that the hydraulic panel, that the electrical pumps right here are off. Same for all the demand pumps, because we're really going to need all the electricity and all the air to start up the systems and the engines later on. So make sure these are all off. But if you load a cold and dark state, that should be fine for now. So again, this is going to take a while. The APU needs some time to start up. If we look outside, we probably can hear it. And indeed, as you can hear, the APU here in the back is now starting up. So let's go back into the cockpit. And it may seem a little bit out of order, that nothing is going to be working. But you just have to be a little bit patient. Let the airplane do its thing. It should all work fine. And there we go. You can hear some systems starting up already. Now what's going to happen, the aircraft is really going to start up the system step by step. And what you will kind of hear, if you hear those fan noises of the cooling systems, of the electrical systems, they'll kind of go up and down about 2 times. And again, we just have to be patient, let the aircraft do its thing before we head over to the overhead panel and check all the systems. So as you can hear, some fan noises going down, and momentarily it will go up again, and probably some more systems will start up. Again, just be patient, the aircraft will do its thing. As you can see, the standby attitude indicator is now working, and the fans go down again. FMCs are a bit more bright, and now the displays come alive. And you will hear strange noise in a second. And after you've heard that noise and you see the warning lights right here, then the aircraft's main systems are pretty much powered up, and the noise that you heard is some kind of testing system that tests the aural cockpit systems and aural warning systems. Right now the main systems have started up. As you can see, we got the displays alive, all the FMCs are alive, so basically we can now go through the overhead panel and take it step by step. So again, column by column, like any Boeing, very simple. First we have the ADIRU, which stands for Air Data and Inertial Reference Unit, and basically this is kind of like the IRS that you would find in the 737. So this system consists of the air data units, which kind of helps calculating the things like airspeed and altitude at high altitudes, and the inertial reference units, which allows the aircraft to determine its position in space. And again, we have to align that in order to make sure, using the latest GPS coordinates, to make sure that the aircraft know where it is in space. So we'll just turn it on right here. You always have to make sure whenever you reset this that ADIRU is off for 30 seconds first before you turn it on. In this case 30 seconds have passed. So next thing we have to do is quickly go to the flight management system right here, and we clicked on FMC. Just make sure that you got the latest AirRock and that the aircraft model and engine type is okay. We go to position initialization, and right here we can set the IRS position. So we can take the GPS position, that's probably the most accurate, and we can set that right here. And right now the IRS will align itself. And as you can see, if you select a realistic timing option in the PMDG setup menu, it will take about 7 minutes to align. So it's handy to kind of do that, you know, before going through the rest of the overhead panel. We will have the thrust asymmetric composition on auto. Pretty much speaks for itself, and we have the primary flight computers. Just make sure that this guard is closed, leave it all on auto. Then we have the electrical panel. We just turn on the battery, of course. Right here we have the in-flight entertainment system and passenger cabin utility switches, basically providing power to the cabin and all its systems, so you make sure you have those switches on. The APU generator was already on, so as soon as the APU was started up, the APU generator is now supplying electrical power to the systems of the aircraft. The bus tie switches have to be in auto. These make sure that the electrical power from either generator can be transferred to the other side of the system. So for example, when this system fails for some reason, then the left generator through the bus tie can make sure it provides electrical power to the other systems. So just leave them on auto as they were. External power, whenever you connect external power through the FS Actions menu, which I can just quickly show you. Click on menu right here, FS Actions. You will see that you have here ground connections. You can connect a ground power. So first you have to set the wheel chocks, and then you can connect the ground power this way. And what you will see then on the overhead panel is that they are available. So you can turn them both on if you want to. In this case we're already using the APU, so I'm just gonna disconnect it for now. Next we have the generator switches. Just leave them all on. Of course the off lights are illuminated. As soon as the engines start up, the generators will take over automatically, so you can just leave these switches as they are. And the drive disconnect switches, you just make sure that the cards are closed, because you don't want to touch those switches in general. So that's all set up correctly. Camera lights, this is used for if you have that enabled, you have here on this display a camera view of the gear, so you can follow the taxi line exactly, and you can turn that on if you want to. In this case we don't need it. Wiper is also off. Then we can go to the next column, ground proximity runway override switch. We just leave that guard closed. I'll move a little bit to the right for a little bit of a better view for you guys. The emergency exit lights, you always want to arm them. You simply do that by closing the guard like this. The service interphone can be left off. This is used to communicate with the ground crew. We don't need it right now. Passenger oxygen, of course, also a switch that you don't want to touch. Whenever there's a guard, that's basically a switch that you don't want to touch. This is used to deploy the oxygen mask, so we don't want to touch that. Window heat, make sure they're always on, whatever the weather. We'll just make sure that you don't build up moisture on the windows, which of course not desirable, so always make sure they're on. Remember, our turbine, also make sure the guard is closed. This is, deployed once both the engines fails, providing some main hydraulic and electrical power to the aircraft in case of an emergency. So just leave that closed. Then we have the hydraulic panel right here. As you can see so far, it's all system by system. We had the electrics, and now we have the hydraulics. Again, just leave this panel for now. We're going to start up the hydraulics just before pushback, basically. Again, these systems were turned off, the electrical systems and the demand hydraulics, because we want to use as much as possible electrical power for the startup. So we're not going to touch this at the moment. We're just going to go ahead with the passenger signs. You can just turn them on, depending on whether the passengers are on board or not. Then we have the lights panel. Pretty much speaks for itself, although on the 777 you might wonder what this switch is, the master bright switch. Basically this switch allows you to control all the lights at once, and if you pull this knob, then it allows you to customize the different lights. So you can kind of play around with this at night. You will see how it kind of works, but just make sure you're aware of this master bright switch, that if you're turning a knob and nothing happens, you probably have to push this switch in order to make it work. Landing lights, of course, we just turn that off for now. You can just adjust these lights based on your preferences. Then we're already going ahead with the third column, the cargo fire. You can just do a quick little test. This will test the cargo fire system, the APU and the engines down below right here. So we'll just take a look. Just hold that button, you will hear the alarm sounds, and you just make sure that all the lights are working. Yeah, that seems to be working. Let's see if I hold this switch. You can see also the engine lights, warning lights illuminate, so in case of a fire we know that this system is working. Then we have the engine panel. Again, you can leave these switches, the EEC mode switches, closed, just stay on normal. And then we have the start panel. Now, depending on which type of airplane you're exactly using between the 777 versions, all this may look a little bit different. In this case we do have the auto start function. Just leave that on. We're going to use that during the engine startup, and basically we're going to use these switches in a moment in order to start the engines. Fuel jettison panel. This is of course for fuel dumping. Again, something we don't want to touch at this point, so I'm not going to go through it. Just make sure that all the guards are closed and that the system is not armed. You don't want to have that. Then we have the fuel panel, fuel pumps. Again, also a very interesting system. Now, basically you don't have to turn any of them on yet. Of course, the APU does need some fuel pump working, but the 777 already turns on one of the fuel pump itself. So it's drawing fuel from this system right here. But just so you know, do make sure you actually turn on this fuel pump once you start the engines. Don't forget to turn it actually on, otherwise the engines will not be drawing fuel from that system. So it's kind of on in the background, right? And these pumps have the pressure light illuminated, so they are not actually supplying any pressure at the moment. Anti-ice, you can just leave them on auto. We don't have to touch any of that right now. Then we have the lights panel. Of course, we have powered the aircraft right now, so you do want to turn on the nav lights. And the rest of the lights you may want to turn on the local lights or wing lights if you're going to inspect the aircraft from the outside. But this is all based on your own preferences again. In this case it's daylight, so we don't need these two lights, but you do have to turn on the nav lights so that the ground crew knows that the aircraft is being powered. And we're going to turn on the beacon lights just before engine start, so the ground crew knows that the aircraft is going to move and that we're going to start the engines. Then the last column, air conditioning panel, pretty much speaks for itself. You want to have the equipment cooling on auto, just leave it as it is. The rear circulation fans, basically circulating air in the cabin, just want to have them on. The Gasper is on, that's those little air vents above your head in your seat, which you can kind of turn on yourself. Yeah, that's also on for the comfort of the passengers. Flight deck temperature, just want to make sure that these knobs are in the middle, so that the temperature is auto regulated for the flight deck and the cabin. But if needed, you can adjust it and make it warmer yourself. Then we have the PAX. Now the APU is running, so of course we can let the APU supply some air, so you will hear some more airflow once we turn the PAX on right now. There we go, so now the aircraft is being air conditioned. So You especially want to turn the PAX on when it's, you know, the temperature is very high or very low. You want to make sure that the passengers, of course, arrive in a nice and warm or cool cabin, depending on the conditions. So also the trim air switches, make sure that they're on, also distributing the bleed air. And basically this panel also, you know, just kind of don't touch it, you know, leave it all on auto. The isolation switches are on auto. You know, depending on the phase of flight and, you know, the procedures, for example, engine start procedure, the aircraft will regulate the bleed air system automatically. So in this case, the APU is now supplying bleed air through the PAX like this. And again, you can use this display right here. I'm going to click here on, let's see, air. And you can see that the APU is now distributing air through all the isolation valves, through all the different sides of the cabin. And you can see also the temperature. So the master temperature is 24 degrees centigrade, and you can also see the temperature on the different compartments of the cabin and also the cargo. So, you know, make sure you make use of all these systems so you can really get an idea of what the systems are actually doing, and this graphical representation is very good for that. The APU bleeds on auto again, and the engine bleeds are on. Of course, the off light is now eliminated. As soon as the engines start up, they will take over the bleed system. So don't worry about that. You can just leave them as they are right now. Pressurization, also leave it on auto. The aircraft will regulate the pressurization itself. If for some reason you want to regulate the pressurization yourself, you can put these switches to off, and you can kind of, you know, manually open and close the outflow valve. But again, we don't use this, and this one you can use to set the landing altitude. The right wiper is off because it's of course not raining. So that's the basic setup of the overhead panel. I hope that gave you a good idea of what all the systems are kind of doing. As you can see, in the meantime, while we were going through all of this, the IRS has aligned, so all the systems are now working, which is great. So we're just gonna go through the rest of the systems. We're gonna cancel the caution lights for now. You can adjust the EFIS panel to your liking. So in this case, the for example, we can set the minimums. Well, we don't have to set minimums right now, but we do want to set Barrow already. Know that the QNH is 1019er here at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at the moment, and well, the rest we can just leave it as it is for now. The MCP, all looking good. We're just gonna adjust that based on our flight plan clearance in a moment. Again, you can use these switches to check all the different systems, make sure all the values are okay. For example, you can check the gear temperature, make sure you can see which doors are open. So pretty useful information. And the first officer can also, you know, adjust the EFIS panel on their side. So further going through the cockpit, you know, basically you just want to check that the windows are closed. You can do a little test of the oxygen mask right here, make sure it's working and it's stowed. And yeah, this is kind of all airline specific stuff, you know. You just want to make sure that all the emergency systems are in place and working. Here we have the display light switch. You can just adjust them to your liking again. So of course it's now daylight, so it doesn't really make sense to adjust these knobs. Just give a, you know, a quick look at the displays, make sure everything is fine. And I'm just going to set the parking brake as well, in order for GSX to work for the pushback in a minute. And then finally we kind of arrive here at the radio panel. You don't really need to set that much, but what is important though, especially if you're flying on VATSIM, you have to turn on one of the microphones on the audio control panel, otherwise you will not be able to transmit on VATSIM. So make sure that VHF1, these are the microphone selecting switches. VHF left is active, so right now your mic is working, and you can also turn on this switch in order to be able to receive the audio from the VHF left radio, which is this radio over here. So right now you can tune the frequency of your liking, and it will work on VATSIM. So if you ever notice, if you're starting from cold and dark on VATSIM and the radio is not working, make sure your microphone is actually enabled for the VHF radio that you're using. So as you can see, we've now reached a state where the basics of the systems are now started up. Basically what we can do now is program the flight management system and get to our flight plan inserted. So this is how you will face the FMC once all the systems have started up. So the first thing that you always want to do is, before you go any further, is load the aircraft with the weight data that you know, has been provided to you in your flight plan. that you've created using PFPX or SimBrief or whatever flight planner you use. So we're gonna load some fuel. Right here you want to enter the release fuel in general on the flight plan, which in this case is pretty much 72 tons. So I'm just gonna put in 72 tons right here. As you can see, that's almost 50% of the fuel level. And we're gonna enter the payload. You can simply enter the zero fuel weight right here, which is 220.88. 220.88. There we go. And now the zero fuel weight is loaded in. So that's all correct. Always make sure before you go any further that the aircraft is actually, using the actual weights that you've planned to take with you, and especially the fuel. Otherwise, the performance initialization is not going to work very well. So what we want to do next is go to the FMC. So right now we already set the inertial reference position, as I just showed you when we aligned the ADIRU, and we're now going to just continue ahead. The FMC is pretty straightforward to use on the Boeing. We'll just go to the next page, which is our route page. Now, if you're used to the 737, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be using ACARS in order to get our route in. So what I've done, I've created a flight plan in PFPX from Amsterdam to JFK, and basically I can just simply request this flight plan, kind of from the ACARS system. Of course, this is all simulated, but what you have to do, make sure if you've created a flight plan in your flight planner, whether it's PFPX or SimBrief, make sure that the flight plan is stored in the correct folder, and then you can request that flight plan through the ACARS system, so we don't have to put in all the waypoints manually. So I'm just going to show you how it works. First of all, let's just enter a departure right here, Amsterdam. We're going to be flying to New York JFK, and our flight number is KLM 641. There we go. Now we can request a route right here. So depending on what route you've saved, you can request a particular route. So it's now going to load it all up. It's going to take a little while. The request is now sent. So it's now going to look in the database, which flight plan matches to our origin and destination. And right now you have a message that the Route 1 uplink is ready. So yes, we want to have that loaded. If you don't want to load it, you can just click purge. But we want to load that flight plan in. So we're just going to click load. There we go. Route 1 uplink is now loading. Very nice. And there we go. So it should now be uploaded. Again, some information may be removed, but if I check the lags page, I indeed see that the entire flight plan is in there. Of course, you still want to cross-check with all of that. As you can see, it also comes up with the next message, but I'm just going to take it step by step for now, just to make it clear. So let's go back to the previous page, route page. There we go. So Amsterdam to JFK. Flight number, just gonna re-enter that. KLM 641. Departure runway is gonna be runway 24. Okay. Then we're gonna go to the departure and arrival page. That's usually what I like to do. I like to select a departure, runway 24, and as you can see on the flight plan, the Bergy 1 Sierra departure is our departure route. So I'm just gonna select that. Go back to our route. And you can check the lags page just to make sure, cross-check with the chart whether all the waypoints are okay. So far it seems to be good. We have all the different Echo Hotel waypoints, and we end up at Bergy, and then from there we continue our route. So that looks nice. Usually I like to personally also select an arrival. I'm just going to select a random arrival right now. I'm not exactly sure which one is currently active, but I've just selected an arrival right here for JFK ILS runway 31 right for a departure arrival and a transition from Echo November Echo. So this is all stuff that you can do during the arrival that you can think about and look up when you're cruising over the ocean. So don't worry about the arrival for now. What matters for now is that you've selected the proper departure route and that you check the lag page to make sure that everything is in there. So we'll just go back to the route page, activate this route, and for now hit execute. So now that the route has been loaded, we can go to the performance initialization page. Now, as you can see, if you use the ACARS system, it's going to actually load some of the data itself already, but you just want to make sure that you cross-check with the flight plan if it's really correct. And for some reason, in my case, it usually is not correct. So usually I reject the performance initialization data right here and just enter all this stuff manually. So we can just ignore the wind data uplink for the moment. We have here the gross weight. What you have to enter is the zero fuel weight. That makes most sense. So as you can see on our flight plan, that's 220.88 as we loaded in earlier on the airplane itself. So let's round it off to 220.9, which automatically fills in the gross weight, as you can see, which kind of corresponds to our takeoff weight at Amsterdam once we've arrived at the runway and burned some taxi fuel. Reserves, you want to enter here the final reserve fuel plus the alternate fuel, which in this case is 4.3 plus 3.3 makes about 7.6 on the reserves. So based on this value, the airplane is going to tell you at some point during the flight, you know, if you reach to your reserve fuel, you will have to divert to your alternate airport, because with that reserve fuel, you're not going to be able to safely arrive at your origin, or your destination, original destination airport. Cruise altitude, just pick the first altitude in your flight plan. In this case, as you can see, the first altitude in the flight plan is flight level 320. If there are any step climbs further on, you can maybe watch my VATSIM Oceanic procedures tutorial, which will hopefully give you some more information regarding step climbs. But for now, just always enter the initial cruise altitude right here. Cost index, again, this is a value that tells you something about how efficient the engines are going to run. The lower the cost index, the more efficient the engines will run, but also the longer the flight is going to be. So this depends on the airline and the aircraft type. Usually I select 30 myself. Then we have the minimum fuel temperature. That's just okay. We can just leave these values as they are. We don't have to change any of this. Then we go to thrust limit. Again, this is just to limit the thrust on takeoff. Now it depends kind of in your flight planner what kind of program you use. For example, you can use TopCat together with PFPX, but this does not support the 777-300ER. But basically, if you have any other performance calculator, you can kind of determine what kind of derated thrust you're going to be taking off, because of course during takeoff you don't necessarily have to use full thrust. So in order to save the life of the engines and to save some fuel, usually takeoffs are performed at a reduced rate. So I'm just going to make something up right now. I'm going to select takeoff 1, so 10% reduction in thrust, as you can see, 96.8 right now. And we can also select a assumed temperature, which is going to reduce it even further. So for example, 50 degrees centigrade. So maybe that's a little bit high actually, so I'm just going to select 40. That looks like a pretty good value, but again, if you have a performance calculator, depending on the weight of the aircraft and the runway length and the conditions, it will provide a nice calculation for you. But just make sure that you're aware of this page and that you actually make use of reduced thrust, because especially if you're not fully loaded like we are today, then it makes no sense to use full thrust on takeoff. Now with the takeoff page, depending on the airline, you may use different flap settings. Again, also on the performance calculation, you may get a different flap setting. I'm just going to take off with flaps 15 in this case. Center of gravity, basically that is determined by the aircraft itself, in the simulated aircraft that is. So you can just click this line select key and it will come up with the center of gravity value itself. And there we have the V speed, so V1, V rotate and V2. So this is the speed at which we're going to decide whether to continue the takeoff or not. Rotate is the speed at which we're going to rotate the aircraft and lift off basically, and V2 is the safe climbing speed. And you want to make sure that you put the V2 right here on the MCP. So that is 162 or 168, sorry. So that's the basic FMC setup done actually. You can check the VNAV page, just make sure the different values for the different phases of flight are correct. So cruise altitude is correct, our climb speeds are okay, transition altitude right here is 3,000 feet, so make sure you change that depending on the airport you're coming from. Next page will take us to the cruise page. As you can see, a step climb to flight level 340 is already entered, and we're gonna step climb at 10:08 Zulu if you would depart right now. So you know, right here you can check when the step climb is most optimum to perform, here on the VNAV cruise page. And the descent page, again, kind of the same stuff. It's kind of the stuff that you can enter during the arrival. You don't have to enter per se, just make sure that the speeds are okay for your different altitudes. Forecast page may allow you to set a transition level, which is 180. And the next thing that I want to do though is load some wind data, and especially on very long flights this is very important. Now, wind data basically can be generated using your flight planner or from Active Sky. So if you go into the FMC FS Actions menu, in the simulation settings you can actually set to create and load a flight plan. And what this kind of will do is automatically load your flight plan and all its different waypoints in your weather engine add-on. For example, in this case, Active Sky for prepared version 4, and it will simply, you know, take a look at all the waypoints, what the wind is at the different altitudes, and based on that you can, you know, load all that information in the flight management system, so you get a more accurate representation of, you know, your route and how much fuel you're going to burn and how much time it will take. So first of all, we can go to the legs page, which is the overview of all the different waypoints. You go to route data, and as you can see, it already gave us an option before to load the wind data using the ACARS system again. So we just click on load, and again it's going to take a little while. And as you can see right now, for all the different waypoints we have now a wind information, so that's very useful. So I'm just gonna click execute for now. So now each and every waypoint, for example here Mokmo waypoint, we can see the different you know, speeds and the direction of the wind at different flight levels. So the descent forecast uplink is also ready. Like I just showed you in the VNAV page, go to the descent section and then forecast, and here we can load the forecast for the descent. And what it's going to do is load different winds at different altitudes. Now I'm not sure if this wind data is exactly correct, to be honest. I'm not running Active Sky at the moment, but anyway, if you use this you'll be able to actually load accurate real-time data at the different waypoints using the legs page in the route data section, and also for the descent phase at the different altitudes. So very useful. In the Boeing 737 you would have to enter that all manually, but in this FMC it's all, you know, loaded through the ACARS system. So as you can see, quite a bit of work, right, to get this FMC going, or the flight management system in general, but that's okay. You know, it's a way of learning the aircraft better, and the more you do it, the more it will just become a habit. You don't really think about it, you know, and it will work out anyway. So we're now gonna go ahead with the startup procedure. We're gonna, you know, push back, start the engines and all of that. The basic FMC setup is done, so that's fine. Again, I'm just gonna go through the overhead panel and then take it all step by step. First thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call up GSX and prepare for pushback and departure. Just make sure that the pushback truck is already you know, ready to go. Straight pushback in this case, apparently at this gate. We don't want to start the engines before pushback, so we'll just let the truck get into position. So basically what we've done so far is all part of the pre-flight procedure, and we want to perform our first checklist. Now on the 777, checklist is very easy. It's actually right here on this panel, here on this side. We can have a checklist button, and the checklist is, you know, electronic. So if you hover your mouse over here, you can check the different items. So oxygen is tested. That was the little oxygen mask that we just tested on our left side. The flight instruments just want to make sure that the headings are correct. So 266 right here on the first officer side, and 266 right here on captain side. Altimeter showing pretty much 0 feet at QNH 1019er, and on the first officer side as well. If you put this on hectopascals, first officer also showing 0 feet at 1019er. So just make sure that the readings are, you know, okay and the same. That's all set. The parking brake was already set and the fuel control switches right here are cut off. So that's the checklist complete. You can then click on normal, which should take you through the next checklist, and that's the before start checklist. So right now the pre-flight phase is pretty much done. At this point you could ask clearance from air traffic control, and then we're gonna go ahead with the final stages before startup. Okay, so let's say we have received our clearance right now. Basically what you want to do then is, for example, enter a squawk code first of all. So you will receive that from ATC, and then you can just put that right here in the transponder. And basically what you want to do is also review the SID, kind of do a departure briefing for yourself, know which city you're flying, what way you're going, and then you can adjust the mode control panel for that. So you can turn the flight directors on. The V2 speed is already set. We can select the runway heading for departure, which should be about 238, and then the initial altitude that we're going to climb to, which is in this case flight level 60. So make sure this is all set, and in this case on the Boeing 777 we're probably going to use LNAV and VNAV. So as you can see, for takeoff LNAV and VNAV are now armed. So when you've done the departure briefing, you basically can really start up the flight itself. What you want to make sure is go to the FS Actions menu again. So just to make sure that you close the doors. So as you can see, one door is now open and all the cargo doors are now closed. So I'm gonna arm the slides as well. There we go. So now that door is okay. And of course you can always check through clicking this button over here to make sure that all the doors are closed and armed. Alright, so that's set. And in order for the ground crew to further set up the pushback truck, we're also going to remove the wheel chucks like this. Okay, so right now the pushback truck will get into position, insert the so-called bypass pin, which makes sure that the hydraulics of the nose gear are disconnected from the aircraft system. And we're just going to open the legs page right here. That's open right here, and then on this flight management system I usually have the progress page open so I can exactly see how the flight is progressing. Okay, as you can hear, the ground crew is ready to release parking brakes and get the aircraft going. Of course we don't want to do that yet, but I always let TSX go up all the way to this stage in order to start the pushback as soon as I get the clearance. So right now we just want to do the before start items in order to get the aircraft ready. If the bypass pin is inserted and if the ground crew has cleared you to start the hydraulics, you can just start the hydraulics. Now the way you start the hydraulics on the 777 is always a bit tricky, just like the 747 and I believe also the 75, 767. You have to start the right demand hydraulic first before you start any of the other hydraulics. Otherwise there's a chance that hydraulic fluid is transferring from one system to the other, and you want to avoid that. So always put the right electric demand switch on auto first. Wait for the fault light to extinguish. There we go. And now we can put on the central primary hydraulic pumps and then the other demand switches. Okay, so it's a bit tricky, keep that in mind. So right now we have all the primary hydraulics are now running. The electrical system is supplying the two center hydraulic pumps, and the demand hydraulics are driven by also electric pumps and two bleed air pumps. Okay, so demand hydraulics are only used when there's really a demand for certain hydraulic input. Then these demand hydraulic pumps will give extra pressure where necessary. And we can also start up all the fuel pumps. Now just make sure for all fuel pumps that the pressure light is extinguishing. Now as you can see, the center pump pressure light is not extinguishing, so there must be something wrong. So just open up the display right here, and we're going to select the fuel page right here. And as you can see, it makes sense the pressure light right here is still extinguished because we simply only have the APU running at this stage. So this tank is not supplying any pressure. But what you do want to make sure is that whenever the level of fuel in the center tank is low, you don't need to turn on the center pumps. Especially when the center tanks are empty, you don't need to turn on the center pumps. During the flight, if you have a really long flight where the center tanks are really full, then the aircraft will advise you that you have to turn off the center pumps. But before flight already, if you're having a little bit of a shorter flight and you notice that the center tanks are pretty much empty or below 3.8 tons of kilograms of fuel, you can just leave the center pumps off, right? In that case only the wing tanks will supply fuel, but in this case we have plenty of fuel in the center tank for this stage of flight, so we're just gonna leave them on, and during flight we'll probably turn them off. So now that the hydraulics and the fuel pumps have been set, you can just do one more check of the overhead panel, again column by column. So all the electrical systems are set. Once the engines take over, the generators will run automatically, that's all fine. Window heat, emergency exit lines, that's all armed, that's good. Hydraulic panel is set, all the passenger signs are set. There we go. Our cargo fire has been tested. All the fuel pumps are on. We're going to turn on the beacon lights because we're going to be moving the aircraft shortly, and the packs will be taken over by the engines automatically in a minute as well. So what we can do now is go through the before start checklist, and that's one right here. So the flight deck door, make sure it's closed and locked. Passenger signs are set. MCP, you want to have the V2 set, is 168, the heading is 238, initial altitude is flight level 60, which is set. The takeoff speeds we've already calculated them right here, just make sure you cross-check them. 159, 163, 168, that's all set. All the CDU pre-flight is completed. The trims, you want to make sure that the rudder trim is at 0 and the aileron trim, which you can read right here on the yoke itself, is set at 0. That's all set. We're going to pretend that we did the taxi and takeoff briefing, so that's completed, and the beacon lights already on. So as you can see, the checklist already, you know, check marks any items that are already finished. Okay, so the beacon lights was already turned on by ourselves, so you know that already completes the checklist. Yeah, the pushback truck wants us to release parking brakes to start the pushback. I'm just gonna click on normal, and then what you want to open right here is the engine page. So this will show us all the engine parameters, which is of course important during startup. Now, one last thing before continuing, we want to make sure that we set the trim for takeoff. As you can see, the trim value is 6.25 for takeoff. Now that we have hydraulics, we can actually set the trim. So just using your trim buttons, you can put this to around about 6.25. Doesn't need to be exactly exact, just make sure that it's kind of okay. It's like that. 6.25 is now set, and we're just gonna put this back on the legs page. So always make sure you set that trim for takeoff. Alright, and that's pretty much it. Right now we're pretty much ready for engine startup. Before we go, I just want to highlight a few things. You know, engine startup right here is all automatic. You don't have to turn packs off or flick the fuel control switch at 25% N2. Basically it will be all done automatically. So what we're gonna do in a moment, as you can see, auto start is now enabled. We're gonna start the right engine first. We're gonna put the engine start switch to start, and then we're gonna put the fuel control switch to run. Alright, and then we're gonna monitor the engine parameters, make sure everything is okay. Alright. Okay, so in this stage you would ask pushback clearance. Let's say we have received the pushback clearance. The before start checklist has been completed. We're gonna put the TCAS on altitude reporting off. So that's right here. As you can see, this allows the ATC on the ground ATC to actually track us in case of foggy conditions, which in this case it is pretty foggy outside, so it kind of makes sense. And basically we can just release the parking brakes now, which will start the pushback, and then we'll start the engine startup procedure. So let's go. We're gonna release the parking brake. Okay, all the engines are clear, so we get the clearance from the ground crew and from ATC to start our engines. So we're just going to put the start switch of the right engine to start. As you can see, some parameters run up, and we're going to put the fuel control switch right on. Alright, so right now we just want to monitor these two displays, okay? Just make sure everything is okay. The aircraft will handle the fuel injection and all that stuff itself. Just make sure the engine vibration stays within limits. Oil quantity should be okay. Oil temperature. You need to make sure that you see some N1 rotation. In this case it seems to be working well. N2 is really spooling up right now. So you will hear the engines rumbling in the background. We have about 50 N2 right now. N1 is looking good, it's spooling up nicely. EGT, the exhaust gas temperature is staying within limits. So, as you can see, the engines has started up successfully. The starter switch is cut out, you might have heard it in the background. It's now back to the normal position. And let's take a look at the overhead panel. As you can see, the generators of the right engine have taken over part of the electrical system. Hydraulics have also been taken over. And soon the PEX will also take over. It's going to take a little while. Okay, the pushback has been completed. I'm not sure if the pushback is entirely correct, but that's okay. We'll see what we can do about it. Anyway, right engine has now been started. It's been stabilized, so we now can continue ahead with the first engine again. Just put the engine start switch to start. As soon as you see some indications right here, you can put the fuel control to run. In the meantime, the ground crew is clearing up the pushback truck. Again, monitor the values. Make sure you keep your hand close to the fuel control switch, so in case something happens, you can abort it if the system doesn't do so itself. N2 rotation. We got N1 rotation coming up. So right about now, the fuel is going to be injected. And as you can see, once that happens, the external exhaust gas temperature is actually rising, which is correct, and the engine is starting up successfully.
Left is clear. Right is clear.
Alright, it's looking good. So, we got 2 successful engine starts. As you can see, it's very simple. What we can now do is open the status page, so we can check the flight controls in a little bit. Sorry, that's the wrong page. That's actually this one right here. Flight control. It's a little bit of a small button. I'll zoom in for you guys. So flight control page, which we'll use for checking the systems. There's pretty much very little to do on the Boeing 777 once the engine has started. Just make sure that all the the different lights have been extinguished. So just make sure both generators of both engines have taken over. You can turn off the APU because we don't need it anymore. Hydraulic panel all looks good. We don't see any other lights illuminated anymore. And the fuel pumps are looking good, and the PEX are also looking good. It might take a while for the PEX to actually turn on once the engines have started up. That's okay. I'm just gonna turn on the taxi lights, and that's basically it for the overhead panel. Just gonna turn on TCAS, and we're gonna set the flaps to 15 for departure. There we go. So as you can see, the flaps are now coming down, and once the flaps are down, we're going to start to check the flight controls. That's of course very important, even though it might not be important in flight simulation. Actually, sometimes it is, because sometimes what I noticed that my yoke is somehow the configuration is not correct anymore, and I have to reconfigure it. So always make sure you check the flight controls. So just gonna test the elevator first. Push forward the yoke. Make sure that the indications right here show elevator deflection, and up. And there we go. I'm gonna check the ailerons right now, full left. Just make sure that all the deflections look okay. Full right and center, and then finally we're gonna check the rudder. Full left and full right. So that's all looking good. We can close the flight control page. We can do the checklist page. Make sure everything is set right here, the radios to your liking. We're gonna do the before taxi checklist. Anti-ice is on auto. There are no icing conditions anyway at this moment, so that's fine. Recall, that's this little button over here. To make sure if there are any other messages other than TCAS, well, we can just ignore the TCAS warning for now, because we can turn on the TCAS as soon as we approach the runway. So that's all checked. Auto brake, want to make sure that it's set to RTO. Again, as you can see, it just fills and checks that automatically. The flight controls have been checked, and the ground equipment is already clear as set by the ground crew. So that's the before taxi checklist. And the before takeoff checklist is pretty much done as well, because the flaps are already set. So guys, that's basically how you start up the Boeing 777. As you can see, it's quite a bit of a complex aircraft if you look at it from, for the first time. But over time you will get more acquainted with it. It will be a lot easier. You'll notice that the systems are actually very easy to use and it all makes sense. And you know, at this stage you will be ready for taxi. You will be ready to start your flight to New York JFK. So if you need any further help with the 777, you know, during the other stage of flight, I would highly recommend to you to watch my VATSIM Oceanic procedures tutorial. Hopefully that will help you out. And of course I also got different VATSIM flights featuring the 777. So it's a very nice aircraft to fly, very easy, and you will definitely enjoy it. Also make sure to check out my Boeing 747-400 startup tutorial. That's also definitely a nice aircraft that you have to try out, and I hope that tutorial will you know, make it easier for you to start up that airplane. And again, you know, airplanes like this are rarely ever started from cold and dark, but it's kind of fun to do, and especially to learn the systems. So I would definitely give it a shot if I were you. And for now, I'd like to thank you for watching this video here on the AviationPro channel. If you like this video, if you appreciate the tutorials, make sure you check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/AviationPro. Your contribution would be very much appreciated to the channel. Of course, a lot of effort goes into tutorials like this, so make sure to check it out. It would be very much appreciated. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe. There will be, of course, a lot more tutorials on this channel in the future. So guys, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you next time.